When you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. That's the only thing that makes sense. Random mutation makes zero sense.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Dr. Jason Fung is a nephrologist and author known for challenging conventional medical paradigms. His best-selling books include the Obesity Code, the Diabetes Code, the Cancer Code, and the Complete Guide to Fasting, where he advocates for metabolic and evolutionary approaches to chronic disease. In this conversation, Dr. Fung invites us into a radical rethinking of cancer, away from the dominant genetic paradigm that sees the disease as a random accumulation of somatic mutations, and toward a more integrated metabolic and evolutionary understanding. Drawing parallels with sociology and anthropology, Fung suggests that cancer is not merely a cellular malfunction to be eradicated, but a deeper sign of systemic breakdown, of individual cells reverting to primitive, survivalist behavior when cooperation fails. Just as societal breakdowns lead individuals to act in isolation and desperation, so too do stressed biological systems push cells into an atavistic, unicellular mode. His approach urges us to move beyond the war metaphor and instead to explore the ecological, metabolic, and interdependent nature of health. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Dr. Jason Fung. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How do you pronounce your last name? I just want to make sure we have it correct.
Fung.
Fung, correct.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm very honored to have you with me because I've been reading your books for a while. And actually the Cancer Code book has been pivotal to my PhD thesis in philosophy. Before we go into the cancer and the evolutionary theory of cancer, would love to know about a little bit more about yourself in terms of how do you think about yourself as a medical doctor in this 2025? What's your mission? What's your vision about who you are and what you can achieve in your lifetime?
Well, I'm a nephrologist, so I'm a kidney specialist, but I have a great interest predominantly in type 2 diabetes, mostly because it is, one, becoming much more important. That is, the number of people being affected by diabetes is going up and up. And of course, it causes kidney disease, which is why I'm very interested in that. And it had occurred to me a while ago that treating kidney disease the way I was doing it was not particularly helpful because we weren't really preventing the diabetes part of it, right? So if you have diabetic nephropathy, then you have diabetic kidney disease, then you need to stop the diabetes, which of course people were saying at the time was completely impossible and stuff. And I said, that's a complete lie, right? It's ridiculous because we know, everybody knows, if you lose weight, the diabetes usually gets better, goes away. A lot of people change their diets and the diabetes goes away. So it wasn't that it was a progressive disease, that it was an incurable disease. It was that most people were looking at it the wrong way, which is basically giving a lot of drugs. Because if the problem is largely dietary, then giving drugs is clearly not going to prevent the problem or make the problem any better, right? So this was the whole issue with and this is the way most doctors still see it. It's quite striking that when you get diagnosed with the disease, you get drugs right away without even any talk about any kind of dietary intervention. So that was really what started me thinking about the whole process of weight loss and type 2 diabetes and reversal of type 2 diabetes. And, luckily through these years, a lot of people have been able to reverse their diabetes. The studies are coming out now showing that with low carbohydrate diets and with intermittent fasting, you can get about 50% of people into remission, a drug-free remission, which is simply stunning because the numbers are actually mind-boggling when you think about the numbers of people with type 2 diabetes. So that was sort of, that's where I see myself really trying to make an impact, is with, trying to let people know how they can reverse their type 2 diabetes, trying to educate doctors, although sometimes it's very difficult because you come across a lot of sort of resistance because people are entrenched in their ways of, oh, well, you just give a lot of drugs. Or, well, this diet works, right? It's like, oh, just cut your calories or just lose weight. It's like, there's no just lose weight. Losing weight is very, very difficult. Or now you have just give them Ozempic, which is a decent enough drug, but it has problems of its own, right? So it's like, well, I don't mind people taking Ozempic, but there are other methods that might be, just as effective and maybe have less side effects. And, that's sort of my attitude towards things.
I want to get a bit deeper into that way, how Jason Fung thinks about the world, right? In terms of you are proposing novel approaches, which for you are obvious, but for the majority of the medical paradigm are not. What made you a curious person and open to change your own formation, right? That's not obvious. That's why the
Yeah.
paradigm's entrenched so much.
I think that's true. I think that a lot of people, when they get into a field, whether it's cancer, type 2 diabetes, or weight loss, they get so entrenched into the sort of standard way of thinking that they can't see any way around it. So, for example, in weight loss, people get entrenched into it. It's all about calories in, calories out. It's like, and me as an outsider, not having, been a part of that world for many years, because I trained in kidney disease, of course. I look at it and I tend to think of things very mechanistically. Like I like to understand things at a very deep level. And that's true not just for medicine, but medicine is one of the areas that I'm most familiar with. But it applies to other things. I like puzzles. I like trying to figure out what the underlying issues are, like, that sort of thing. So when I look at a problem like weight loss and obesity and people say it's all about calories, it's like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like if you look at it simply, it doesn't make any sense because look, if you say that excess calories causes obesity long term, then you can simply do an experiment, give people excess calories and see if they gain weight long term. And that experiment has been done. It's been actually done multiple times and it doesn't work. So Dr. George Bray, who is one of the very, very legendary sort of nutrition researchers, he did it himself. He did it on himself. So Dr. George Bray, he overfed himself. He said, what I did is instead of taking one sandwich to lunch, I took two sandwiches. And instead of, eating one portion, I ate two portions. He couldn't keep it up. He said he couldn't keep it up. He was too full. He simply couldn't stomach it. So then he couldn't gain weight. And that was exactly the experience when people simply tried to increase the amount of food. So it wasn't simply the excess of calories. On the flip side, if you say, okay, excess calories causes obesity or weight gain, then reducing calories is going to cause the opposite. It's going to cause you to lose weight. And of course, that doesn't work. Millions and millions of people have tried it. There's been, dozens and dozens of huge, huge, huge research studies looking at cutting calories. They've lasted, 8, 9 years. The Women's Health Initiative, the NIH has done studies, all kinds of studies. And what you find is that when you tell people to cut calories, mostly by cutting fat, and that was the main way they cut calories, people didn't lose weight. Over 5, 6 years, you'd have a difference between the usual diet and a calorie reduced diet of like, half a pound, over 8 years. So barely any difference. So therefore, if you say this is a causal effect, it doesn't make any sense. Whereas opposed to if you say, okay, let's look at it differently. Let's look at it very simply. If you say insulin, the hormone insulin, excess insulin causes weight gain, simple experiment to prove. Give people insulin, do they gain weight? 100% yes, right? You give them insulin, they gain weight. You give them drugs which increase insulin, like glycoside, sulfonylureas. They increase insulin. You give drugs that take away insulin. Do they lose weight? Absolutely. So Ozempic is a primary example. SGLT2s. You have a disease like type 1 diabetes where you have no insulin. Do they lose weight? Absolutely. So it's like, okay, well, you have a clear causal mechanism, which you've proven, right? Because people always say, it's strange, because when you look at it, it's like so simple, right? You want to know what causes obesity. You have a hypothesis and you test it. So insulin passes that test because it's like causal. You give it, it gets worse. You take it away, it gets better. And the thing is that then people, it's strange because people go through all these sort of, they bend over backwards to try and prove that it's not true. They say, well, insulin doesn't increase energy expenditure, or insulin doesn't reduce how many calories you eat. I'm like, I didn't ask if it reduced the number of calories you ate. I asked if it increases body fat percentage, right? And the whole thing is they can't get their mind around that body fat percentage is a regulated entity. Like the body has mechanisms to regulate how much body fat you have. It must, right? And again, being from outside the field, I'm not, I look at it and I see things that, seem to be obvious, right?
Yeah.
Just like if you have everything else in your body, like how much water you have in your body, it's highly regulated. You drink more, you pee it out. You drink less, you don't pee it out, right? Okay, that's obvious. You don't have to, you don't say body, the amount of hydration status of your body is water in minus water out,
Yeah.
right? So therefore, you must count how many milliliters of water you drink every day and regulate it because
Yeah.
your body regulates it already. So body fat is the same. It is regulated. So therefore, if you try to raise it, such as Dr. Bray did with excessive calories, you can't because the calories don't regulate it. And the thing about calories is that it's a completely non-physiologic measure. There's nowhere, read any standard textbook of physiology, nowhere in it will you find any mention of calories. Like if you look at, metabolism of carbohydrates, metabolism of protein, metabolism, growth, any of that. Calories is nowhere.
Yeah.
Why? Because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Cellular energy is measured in what? ATP, right? It's not measured. There's a Krebs cycle, there's a citric acid cycle. Do you see calories anywhere? No. You see glucose, you see insulin, you see amino acids, you see triglycerides. Those are physiologic measure. Calories is not.
Yeah.
It's simply not. You can't say that a calorie of carbohydrate is the same as a calorie of protein because they're metabolized completely differently. So why do you accept that calories, which has, no role in human physiology, is suddenly the only thing that's important in obesity medicine, but no other part of medicine has anything to do with calories? It doesn't make sense, right? So the whole thing is completely, I look at it from a physiologic standpoint and I say, well, there's nothing physiologic about the way that we're explaining weight loss and weight gain. Our body runs on hormones. Our body only does stuff that our hormones tell it to do. It grows when our hormones tell it to. It, stops growing when it tells it to. It pees out water when it tells it to. It retrieves water. Like the whole thing is quite strange. So I think that's where it is. I mean, I did this, that's for obesity. For diabetes, it's the same. For cancer, it's the same. Cancer medicine is also stuck in this huge sort of silo where no people who are deep into it are so sort of brainwashed by the current thinking that they really can't see anything else as being important, right? For years, it's all genetics, 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 genetics. What's the genetic defect? What's the mutation? What's the mutation? It's like, that's not the problem.
Yeah.
What is causing those mutations? That's your real problem.
Yeah, in your book, The Cancer Code, you can almost say that, when I read it, it's like Dr. Fung is an outsider talking about cancer, but so eloquently that he seems the most insider of them all, right? The outsider becomes the insider when you have just a novel optic on the same thing. How did that realization, before you wrote the book, was for you, that cancer was really very much entrenched in a specific way of seeing things? And why did you, yeah, how did you stumble upon a new approach that said, yeah, that makes more, even more sense, and you wrote about it so eloquently?
Yeah, again, it wasn't so much that I mean, I'll tell you for the cancer code, like I think it's actually the most interesting, although it's the most technical and the people who have read it, my friends who are like the medical doctors, I actually think it's the most interesting because it's so novel. I actually think it's the most interesting stuff I wrote. The Thing about the cancer is, you get so ingrained into this idea that it's all driven by mutations, right? So you have breast cancer, for example, and you say, well, breast cancer has these mutations. And obviously, every time you get breast cancer, you can see this mutation, like BRCA, you have this mutation, that mutation. So then you get into this idea that it's all driven by mutations. And what you need to do is catalog these mutations, right? So let's find out the three or four major mutations of breast cancer, and then we'll design treatments to treat these three or four genetic mutations in whatever gene it is you're talking about, right? And they've done that, and it's been done for years, right? So ever since 2000, with the Human Genome Project, the cost to, sequence a genome has fallen like dramatically. So you can sequence all kinds of things. So other than the Human Genome Project, there was a much larger study of cancer genomics called the Cancer Genome Atlas. And the thing about that is that nobody, after it got published, I think in 2018 or something, nobody even cared about it, which is interesting because if we're thinking that cancer is driven by mutations and we want to catalog all these different mutations, why didn't anybody care about this, right? And it's because the number of mutations that we found in cancer was not like three or four. It was like 6 million or something like that and counting. So it's like, okay, well, that's not even feasible as a therapeutic strategy to go after mutations if there are 6 million. What are you going to do? Develop 6 million different drugs? Like, that's impossible. So, what's more interesting is to sort of get to the heart of the matter is not the actual mutation, but you have to go sort of that step further and say, what is actually driving those mutations? Because the mutations are not random. And that's the thing that gets me about this whole somatic mutation theory of cancer is that their core hypothesis is that the breast cell, for example, undergoes mutation, which it does, but that it's a random mutation, right? So if cells are under stress or if they're exposed to mutagens like ionizing radiation, they get more mutations. And by chance, one of those mutations may hit a critical area, right? Just like if you buy more lottery tickets, there's more chance that you're going to hit the jackpot. But the thing is that all these things that are not mutagenic are cause cancer, like obesity, for example. Obesity doesn't cause gene mutations. Okay, like smoking certainly can, but obesity can. So why is it such a huge factor? And the thing is, if you look at the sort of overall burden of risk factors, and they've done this study where they say, okay, well, what percentage of cancer is caused by smoking, for example, and it's like 30%, right? And then you can do the same thing for, say, radiation, ionizing radiation, or whatever, or chemicals like herbicides, pesticides, chemicals. Those are all like 2%, 3%. There's only one other thing that's on the same level as smoking as a cause of cancer, and that's diet. And yet nobody talks about it. How does the diet contribute to cancer? It's so important. It's such a huge factor, but people in the field can't get around the fact that, hey, diet is not mutagenic. So therefore, it's not important, but it is important. Your own research has proven how important it is, but you can't fit it into your current paradigm. So therefore, instead of changing your paradigm, you just throw it out and say, well, there's something there, but I don't really care. It's like, why don't you care? It's like 30% of the, applicable risk, right? The risk that you can determine, right? And it's like, holy crap, like there's a huge area here that nobody's really even looking at, like how diets change your risk of cancer. And it's all just because people are so fixed into that mindset that they can't really see out.
Yeah, what I love about your approach is not only that you delve into those factors that haven't really been taken into account, but you take us into that evolutionary perspective on how the cell evolved, and to show that the selective pressure of evolution is acting upon the cancer so that the cancer can survive and be stronger, right? How did you make that connection of really understanding evolutionary biology and talking about cancer as an atavism and a reversal of the cell to behave as a more primordial unicellular organism.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come up with it. The evidence actually exists and people have talked about it. It's just that it's not very many people. And so but it's the only thing that fits, right? It's the most, it's the way that it's the theory that sort of fits all the sort of inconsistencies of the somatic mutation theory, which is that you can really only understand cancer. And I think cancer has sort of undergone these sort of waves of understanding. So first is understood as just a cell that grew too much, right? And it's not wrong, but it doesn't explain why it grew too much. So then they have this somatic mutation theory, which is that, so you say, okay, we have cells that are growing too much. Why are they growing too much? Well, because the genes are causing them to grow too much, right? So that's not, it doesn't say that the previous theory that went ahead of it was wrong. It's sort of trying to go a level deeper, right? And so the genetic sort of theory of genes, mutated genes are causing the excessive growth. Okay, that's fine. That's true. We know that's true, but that doesn't explain what is driving the mutation of those genes, right? And that's where the somatic mutation falls down because it says that it's just a random mutation, which clearly it is not, right? And this is the thing that people have to understand is that when you look at it under an evolutionary lens, then you can understand. But look at it this way. If you have random mutations, how can two people, say a world apart, so you have, a person in America in 2025, and you have a Japanese, right? The other side of the earth, a Japanese woman, different sex, in 1925 who develops breast cancer, right? So two different people, different sex, half a world apart, a century apart. And yet their breast cancers look identical. Yet you know that they developed that man, or colon cancer, since breast cancer doesn't happen that much in men, but colon cancer, for example. How did that colon cancer develop from that colon cell in that American man in 2025? And the colon cancer developed in that Japanese woman in 1925, completely separately from their own originally normal colon cell. And if you're to compare them, they might have, no mutations in common. Yet when you take the two cells and look at it under a microscope, they look identical. They look the same. You can classify them as the same, right? You can tell under the microscope that they're the same. Well, clearly, whatever force is pushing those mutations is not random, right? You can't have two random things and they look exactly identical. Two people in the chemotherapy clinic sitting in two chairs right next to each other. They might have 30 mutations in person A and 30 different mutations in person B, but completely different mutations. But yet the cancer cells look identical. Well, you can't understand that until you say, well, there's obviously an evolutionary pressure that is pushing these cells towards that cancer state. Just like in evolution, we all learned in high school biology that, hey, and, the finches, Darwin started off describing finches, right? And he said, well, there's two species of finches, and on one side of the island, they have these short, thick beaks. Why? Because they have nuts. They're eating nuts, and they need these strong beaks. On the other side, they're eating seeds. They have these thin, sharp beaks, right? So the difference in how they look was driven by their environment, not by random genetic mutation. Random genetic mutation plays a role because if there's a random genetic mutation, it gets selected. That's evolutionary pressure. Same thing in the cancer. What is selecting for this phenotype, which is the cancer cell? When you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. That's the only thing that makes sense. Random mutation makes zero sense. The chance of two people having the same mutations or 30, 40, 50 different mutations, half a world apart, a century apart, different sexes, but then looking exactly the same, the chances of that have to be sort of like 1 in, 50 quadrillion or something like that. It'd be so rare that it would not exist and yet exists multiple times because those colon cancer cells look the same. Breast cancer cells in the clinic, the two people sitting next to each other look the same. So it has to be an evolutionary. There's no way that it cannot be.
What I think is fascinating is that this evolutionary pressure is ironically making us behave as a retroevolution, right?
Yeah.
Like the selective pressure is unearthing a code that we have in our genes to behave as more unicellular organisms. And I think that's ironic, right? That the
Yeah, that's the
future is driving us
fascinating
to the
part.
past. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part, which is that how can you have two phenotypes which look exactly the same? In fact, all cancers actually are share a lot of features. All malignant cancers share a lot of features. And how can that be, right? How can a breast cancer cell share a lot of features with colon cancer or prostate cancer or whatever cancer, right? So this is the thing is that why does it act like that? And that's the fascinating part of trying to apply the evolutionary theory to cancer is that what you wind up coming up with is that it's not a evolution forward, it's more this evolutionary backwards. That is the way that we all developed from millions of years ago from a single-celled organisms. Those single-celled organisms have all the characteristics of a cancerous cell. As we evolved from single-celled organisms to multiple-cell organisms, what you have to realize is that there is a massive change in the way that cells have to interact. So single-celled organisms compete with each other for resources. Once you get multiple-celled organisms like we are, then you have to cooperate. But the way that we develop is that we don't simply erase those parts of the genetic code. What you do is you build code on top of it and say, code to inactivate parts of the cancerous cell and other code to sort of do other things. So when you start to, so that sort of core, that sort of kernel of cancer actually exists in every single cell in every single multiple celled organism. So not just us, but dogs and cats and rats and plants and all that sort of thing. So when you start to evolve, when you start to have selection pressure towards survival, what happens is that you sort of unearth the most survivable part of the cell, which is that original single-celled organism. Because if you think about how a cancer cell acts as a celled organism, as it competes with others, it grows, destroys tissue around it, it does all things, even its bioenergetics, come from sort of evolution path is the Berg effect, which is the going to metabolize glucose, and even though there's plenty of oxygen, you're not using oxidative phosphorylation, you're using a different you generate lactate and so on. So this whole idea is that this explains why cancer exists in every single one of our organs. It explains why cancer exists in multiple species. So if you're looking for what's causing cancer and you're looking at humans, cancer is not a human disease. It spans every single multi-celled organism. So the question is, what's stopping us? And this is the thing that's interesting, is that the thing that's stopping us is that cancerous changes are actually happening all the time. So there are cells that are under stress that may undergo cancerous change. And our body knows this. And our body has a very strict immune surveillance system to go after it. So it's not like that cancer doesn't exist and then it exists when you get older and you get, your tumor. No, it's there all the time. Cancerous transformations are happening all the time, but your immune system is basically wiping them out. It's basically going around, finds them and kills them. So again, this explains why when you take immune suppressing drugs, you get cancer. If you give somebody a renal transplant or liver transplant or whatever, you take these usually 3 or 4 super immune suppressing drugs. And that's because you want to prevent rejection. Well, one of the known side effects of that is that if you have an underlying cancer, that cancer goes crazy. It grows like nobody's business, right? And so, in fact, and this happens all the time. You give it to kids and you can see cancers as soon as you start suppressing their immune system. Why? Because what's keeping the cancerous cells in check is the immune system. And when you suppress it, you allow these cancer cells to sort of grow. Again, you can't explain that because suppressing the immune system is not a mutagenic thing. It doesn't increase gene mutations when you suppress the immune system. It's not
Yeah.
mutagenic, right? But what it is a decrease in immune surveillance. So all of these sort of things about cancer that people don't understand are simply because they're locked into this sort of paradigm that doesn't explain it. And what we're trying to do with the evolutionary paradigm of cancer, which is as an atavism, is not to say that the gene mutation is are not there. It's going one step further and saying we're trying to understand cancer at this deeper level. It's only at understanding that deeper level that you can develop treatments that are going to be more
Yeah.
successful.
You know what was fascinating to me? I'm a sociologist, and I like philosophy of science. And when I read your book, which is basically physiology, evolutionary biology, I was reading the same things I'm reading in anthropology and sociology, which is basically as human species, we have understood ourselves as only individuals, like the atomistic version of we are self-sufficient, like unicellular organisms. But clearly we are not. We are multicellular organisms that we need to organize so that life can prosper and regenerate. And it was fascinating to see this mirror on cancer showing us this atavistic behavior. And in a sense, I said probably we are doing the same in society with the planet, right? We are confronted with chronic sublethal stress. It's not killing us, but it's putting us in a very uncomfortable position. And our bodies, in terms of the physical physiology, but also the way we organize, the way we interact with each other, because it wants to survive, because it feels that the stress is putting your survival in danger, then you are behaving atavistically, like more individualistically.
Yeah.
And it's
In fact,
fascinating. Have you talked to
it's
sociologists and
in
anthropologists about
fact,
this?
I haven't actually, but if you think about from a sociology standpoint, it's exactly the same thing. So if you have a single person living in the woods by themselves, right? They go where they want, they move where they want, they hunt where they want, they take whatever resources they want. That's like an individual cell. Now you put those cells, those people together in a city like Tokyo or Mexico City or something. You put millions and millions and millions of those people together. Now you have to develop rules, right? You have laws. You cross the street, you have traffic lights. You can't just walk into somebody's house. That's not your house. In order for that city to function, it has to have all these rules. Now, that underlying individual person who hunts, who fishes, who lives on their own in the woods is still there, but they've been molded now by the society with these new rules. Now, what happens when society breaks down? Those rules break down, right? You're under stress. The city is under stress, right? We know what happens. As soon as you get this, you get the rule of law is taken away. It's every man. You get gangs roaming around, right? It's every person for themselves. Everybody starts fighting each other. That's exactly what has happened in cancer. That person, that accountant who is living and working, whatever, all of a sudden now becomes this person who will shoot other people and kill other people and go attack for resources, right? Why? Because he wants to survive. And in order for him to survive in this new state where, say, the city, the law has broken down for whatever reason, right? There's a coup, there's no
Yeah,
law.
we lived it in COVID in the first weeks of the
Yeah,
quarantine. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Like everyone,
exactly the
like I
same
need to go
thing.
to the supermarket and get as much as toilet paper I can, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then everything breaks down, whereas where it was working well before. But again, it's that change from that orderly society, and that's the same as our multicellular organism, right? So our body has very strict rules for everybody to do the right thing at the right time, so we can all work together and thrive. You do better as a multi-celled organism, obviously, because humans have taken over the planet, not single-celled organisms. So when you work together, everybody benefits. But when there's a breakdown in that structure, just like that city, like, you say you have a city that's under war or under siege or whatever. All of a sudden, you have warlords popping up and you have gangs roaming the streets and you have this and that, right? And that's the same idea. It's no different. It's that sort of reversion to a more primitive state. And the cell does the same thing. That cancer cell, the colon cell, reverts to that more primitive state, which is that cancerous sort of kernel that's in everybody. And the interesting part about this sort of reversion to a more primitive state is that that's exactly how the pathologists read it. Whenever pathologists read a cancer cell, it's like it's primitive. It's it's every word they use describes how it's more rudimentary than the others. Just like in a society, like you would have, a huge city, you might have a person, wears a nice suit, goes and works as a dentist, right? But then when everything breaks down, no more nice suit, he's joined a gang in order to survive, right? It's just what you have to do in order to survive. But it's the same person, right? It's just the circumstances that have pushed you towards that. So it happens in sociology as well, and it's sort of fascinating the parallels that you could draw. And it's the same thing, right? So we think that we're so different, but if you consider the person as a cell and a city as a multi-celled organism, exactly the same thing happens.
Yeah. It's the seed and the soil approach, right? The seed is your soil. And you can imagine how fascinating it was for me to read your book in that sense. And that's why I'm dedicating my PhD dissertation on this topic. Because you don't talk much about the narrative of cancer and the warlike approach that we have taken towards cancer and how to kill cancer and how to kill this foreign invader. But this sociology and evolutionary perspective are creating a new narrative, a new story on how cancer can be signified and how cancer can be even approached, both from the medical standpoint, but also from the cultural, emotional aspect of it, which is so disempowering at this age, right? What do you think about this evolving narrative of cancer if we use these kind of
Yeah,
approaches to read
I
it?
think that's the way forward because if you think about it, I mean, just like if you have that dentist who becomes like a gang member because the society has broken down, right? It's the same person. And the idea that this is a bad person, we need to kill him, right? That's not the right approach. You have to say, well, what's broken down is the rules. Once we reinstate those rules, then we can then have all these people living a orderly, productive life again, right? Same thing in cancer. It's not about trying to kill as many of these cancer cells as possible, because you could never kill them all. Because believe me, we've tried, right? We've developed all kinds of things to kill as many of these cells as possible. You can never kill all the cells because that cancerous core remains in every single cell. So as long as the conditions are ripe for developing cancer cells, any cell in your body can be cancerous. And that's the whole thing. So instead of focusing all your energy on how to kill cells, like yes, that still is a valid treatment paradigm. It's not saying that it's not, but maybe there's other ways. Like, how do we do it? And they're, nutritional ways. Because again, if you think about it, it's what makes sense, right? So you have 30% of cancers being related to smoking. The attributable risk is smoking. So obviously the answer is stop smoking. Great, right? Everything else is less than 5%. The only other thing which is sitting at like 30% is diet. So, how do you change your diet so that it's less amenable to cancer? And that's a huge, huge topic because if you can, then obviously that's a better way is to prevent the cancers from happening, prevent what leads to cancer from happening, right? As opposed to trying to treat it afterwards.
Yeah. What do you think also about this? We can also, from this lens, we can read cancer as a disease of isolation in a sense that we feel stress, we feel fear, and we isolate. And when we isolate, we feel even more stress and we feel even more fear because we are not sustained by our community. How would you say that this is also a factor that we must put into this logic of one of the other causes of cancer is obviously the nutrition part and many others, but also this lack of felt interdependence with others and the
Yeah.
planet itself.
Yeah, I mean the parallels go actually, right to, as far as you want to take it, because cancer is really about the collective, the multi-celled working together versus the single-celled, right? So the single-cell organism basically wants to take as much for itself. It moves where it wants and it tries to destroy others because if you denigrate others, then you are better, right? So that's the attitude of the single cell, and that's exactly what a cancer does, right? So you've basically got a single cell, just like you might have like a wild person, who's used to living in the woods, and you set him inside Mexico City, after living a whole life by himself, he'll go crazy too, right? It's the same idea. So it's a disease of that isolation. It is a disease of that sort of primitive state, as opposed to, trying to make sure that it's more civilized, where you can live in harmony with others, right? That's the idea. In a cancerous cell, it does not live in harmony with others. It is trying to attack the others as opposed to the other. And what caused that breakdown, right? So that's the idea. Is like, how do you get them to do better? I mean, putting them together obviously is you can't just do that. You have to see what they need to change, what rules you need to change, how you can do it. And the idea of this deeper understanding is to develop other ways to attack cancer, right? So we've tried to do chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, ways to kill cells. We've tried genetic approaches, and that hasn't gone too far. Is there some other way? And there are other ways now. Immune therapy, for example, checkpoint inhibitors and stuff that are gaining a lot of traction and really are best understood in the setting of this evolutionary sort of paradigm. But there's more. There's clearly more that we could do. But most people are still focused on, oh, what kind of gene mutations do we have out there? So it's like that's a dead end. Like there's no way.
Yeah, we're approaching our end of this conversation. I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you, Jason. But one more question: what about, how helpful has been for you, as you say, probably sometimes as an outsider, to be looking at certain problems, to bring together other optics, other sciences, other disciplines to work on the same problem, right? Because we usually say, no, cancer is the problem of geneticists or doctors, right? But how much can we really invite to the conversation, like for example, physicists, which I know, like Dr. Paul Davies, which is a physicist that came into the National Cancer Institute and said, we need to look at this more from the evolutionary perspective. So how much of that in your life and your institution, and how much would you wish for that to see more in the world, to bring more disciplines together?
Yeah, I think that's the way that, science moves forward because really, if you look at it, and Paul Davies, his story is fascinating because he was an astrophysicist and he knew nothing about cancer. And the National Cancer Institute one day invites him to be part of this, initiative. And he said, I know nothing about cancer. And they said, good, good. That's exactly what we're looking for. We want fresh ideas. We want you to be unencumbered by the standard thinking. Because honestly, if you do, your PhD, then you do another 10 years of research, you spent 20, 25 years immersed in one paradigm of cancer, which you have believed wholeheartedly is correct and may or may not be correct. Science evolves. Whereas as an outsider, like a physicist, may see something which is purely obvious to him that, took him 3 seconds to identify, and you didn't. Like to an evolutionary biologist, it's obvious that what's happening is something to do with evolution, right? Because cells are evolving towards a certain state, this cancerous state, and it's not random. So why are all these cells evolving to this cancerous state? Well, there's got to be something, right? It has to be something. What is that something? If you don't even identify that there is something, you can't look for it because you don't know what it is. Whereas to them, to an evolutionary biologist, to a physicist, they're like, well, it's obvious because one, everything's evolving to this state. You've got genetic mutations, but the phenotype is not random. You've got all these different factors that you haven't accounted for. Why are all cells susceptible to cancer? Why are all animals affected by cancer? Like you have all these different things, which you may or may not have, having spent 20 years looking at one human breast cancer, you may not even think about these sort of issues. So bringing that together is bringing those fresh perspectives is always a good idea because I think sometimes you get so into your own sort of mind that it inhibits you from seeing the wider perspective. And nobody likes to be accused of being narrow-minded, of course, but the problem is if you say something and do something according to one specific paradigm and you've done it for 20 plus years, it's very difficult to suddenly say, oh, okay, you know, we'll change it, right? So it's like that's where these things are interesting. I think that's where you can cross-pollinate a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, I would love to see you get your head on astrophysical problems and see how a doctor from Toronto can help them. Jason,
Thanks
thank
so
you so
much.
much. As you know, I'm one of the heads of the Mexican Association of Lifestyle Medicine, and for us, it's very obvious that health it's really mediated by lifestyle. Nutrition, movement, sleep, stress, relationships, and certainly we would hope to invite you soon to one of our congresses and meetings because your perspective is unique, and you are bringing together so many good ideas that we need to legitimize that it would be an honor to have you with us someday.
Thank you so much.
You have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.